I see the position of Germany within the EU being weakened by their non-participation in a decision at the moment, rather than the fracturing of NATO.
First of all, Friday was seen as an absolutely crucial meeting yesterday. How much frustration do you think there is at Germany's failure to make the commitment to send tanks to Ukraine?
Well, I think there's a lot of frustration, but I think we have to look at why fighting stops to really answer that question. So the first reason fighting stops is decisive military victory. And you can't win by being on the defense. So the Leopards, or any tank provision in scale, would enable combined arms maneuver, that's infantry, tanks, engineers, artillery, air defense, to retake lost territory, which is what Ukraine need to do. They cannot do that without tanks. So there isn't a possibility of decisive military victory. The second one, without the provision of tanks, of course, is wars start or fighting stops because of the improbability of victory. And Russia could therefore potentially hold its gains, and we get to a negotiated peace which would break the sovereignty of Ukraine. The third one, which is where the Germans, you have to give them some credit for, is wars and fighting stops because of unacceptable costs. They might be political, military, economic, or societal costs, such as the infrastructure. One of the things that was given by the Germans yesterday at the 8th Contact Group meeting were one of the Patriot batteries alongside those of US and Netherlands, and 2 IRIS-T air defense systems as well. That is significant capability to minimize those sorts of attacks that occur on the infrastructure of Ukraine.
But Ukraine clearly wants the tanks. It clearly feels that there is likely to be a Russian offensive in the coming months as we head towards the spring, and that because of the nature of the fighting, particularly along the east of the country, what it needs is those tanks. Is there a chance, do you think, that Germany could still make that commitment with not just Ukraine, but many other allies pressing it to do so?
Yes, I think they will. So the other sidebar really from Pistorius, the defense minister of Germany yesterday, was really 2 things. Firstly, that the Ukrainians will start being trained on the Leopard tank. And secondly, although I'm sure they should have known this already, that they will be taking an inventory of their tanks. Now, I think the other possibility, of course, is that the frustration really from those countries which are closest and border Russia, particularly Poland, is that they take a sovereign and independent position to give the capability Ukraine, regardless of the consent of the Germans. Now, that might cause a diplomatic row, and it might also cause the sort of technical aspects of spares and things like that not to be given by the Germans. But that would have 2 impacts, really. Firstly, I think it would ruin the German armaments industry. Why would you buy anything from Germany if Germany has the sort of red card on it? And secondly, it weakens the German position in Europe as a sort of leader in Europe. They just seem to be sort of pusillanimous really in this, and not stepping up to the plate when it's really needed. Now, the reason that...
Do you think it is that countries like Poland, which have made it clear that they've got these German Leopard tanks and they want to send them to Ukraine, how likely do you think it is that they will just go ahead and do so? And surely Germany can't really stop countries like that from doing so.
It's not a physical transfer risk. They cannot stop that physically. And it's certainly been said by the Polish Prime Minister that no matter where this gets to, if they need to take a decision, they will take a decision as they see fit, for the simple reason that the security of all Europe, from their perspective, depends on it. And that's why countries like Poland, who were invaded by Russia in 1939, and Finland, who were also invaded by Russia in 1939, and Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, 1941, that's the reason that they absolutely are hard over on this capability being given to the Ukrainians. They know what it's like, A, to be invaded, and B, to live under an occupied Russian sort of comfort, and it's not a good thing to do. That's why they wanted to join NATO. It wasn't the eastward expansion of NATO, it was the fear of the westward expansion of Russia, which was always the issue for these countries.
What about the role of the United States? Germany seems to be suggesting that if the Americans were to send tanks, they might be more prepared to send theirs.
Well, this is a sort of the notion of sharing risk. Now, risk, if you look at it in a calculus, is always two parts. It's impact and likelihood. And it's really to do with their notion of escalation. Now, I can't quite see why they'd be worried about this. Okay, they want to move in lockstep with the Americans, but if you look at the component parts of escalation, they can only escalate in a number of areas. There's 7 in total. You either escalate by weapons, tanks have already been used, but they're not being the Leopard tanks. Objectives, targets, rhetoric, the Russians saying that we'll go after these and it'll be a dangerous thing. Geography, domains, which means either cyber or space, or further mobilization by Russia. Now, one of the things the Russians haven't done in escalation in geography is go after any Western equipment which is being delivered over the Ukrainian border. The nearest they got to it was that strike, as we might remember, on the 13th of March on Yavoriv base, which was one of the conduits for Western kit. So that the notion that they would extend the geography to interdict this sort of equipment being transferred to Ukraine, I don't think is plausible, because that could come into a Article 5 NATO operation, i.e. you're taking on NATO. And one of the things the Russians, I think, don't want to do, even though they have the sort of framing that they're taking on NATO, is to bring the entire capability, including air power, of NATO to bear, because they would absolutely, I think, get destroyed in short order if you brought that to bear.
Do you think there is a risk that Germany's attitude in all of this risks a real fracturing of that unity, which has been such a feature of the response of NATO and its wider allies?
I don't think it does in the long term. But really, you've got to look at the grand strategic objectives of Russia to understand that. So the first grand strategic objective is regain lost territory and spheres of influence. The second one is to re-establish Russia as a great power. But the third and fourth are where this comes into play. The third one is to divide and deter NATO, which they haven't at the moment. And the fourth one is to divide and weaken the EU. I see the position of Germany within the EU being weakened by their non-participation in a decision at the moment, rather than the fracturing of NATO.